technical or the science stream, but then once they graduate, they find that there's no job opportunities in their own state. So they're essentially sort of moving out, and let's say both the state who sort of invested so much and the parents who had so much of hopes about the children, those are all sort of destroyed. So I think even if it was a kind of a very anecdotal kind of information, I think at the very heart of this Odisha vision document that we're talking about, we also should not forget, irrespective of what Amarendra was mentioning, that we have become a kind of a middle income state now. We must not forget that for long, long decades, whether during the colonial time or later period, we definitely remained one of the most underdeveloped states in the country. And even if you are sort of focusing only on the GDP growth or the per capita GDP growth, which sort of gives us a sense of achievement that we have sort of moved a little up in the ladder, we must also recognize that the distribution of the benefits, distribution of the gains of economic development has not been adequate. We still have the larger KBK region, for instance, from where there's a huge out-migration, distress migration. These are not migrations based on aspirations. So the distress migrations, they continue. And there are several sectors, particularly the primary sectors, whether it is agriculture, whether it is forestry, whether it is fishing. There's a variety of sectors where we could have probably invested in terms of certain kinds of business infrastructure, which could have made some of these sectors more dynamic, may have created more opportunities for local income and employment. So all that probably we have missed out. We may have done very well in terms of inviting the big private capital coming into certain kinds of high value adding mineral-based industries or the extractive industries. But then we must also recognize that in several of the countries in the world, including in Africa, including in Latin America, for instance, where the initial stages of processing has been stalled, that also has meant that despite having a huge amount of resources, economic resources, minerals in particular, you may not actually be prosperous because your value addition doesn't sort of happen at the location. So with that, I'm sort of very excited I'm looking forward to the discussions here. I hope I have not taken much time. And so in this process, as I was mentioning, this is a thinking process, in fact. So not that we are going to change the world overnight, but then very often ideas from all of you will enrich us. And as I said, all of us, or at least me, I'm sure that I have not really quite well prepared my chapter so far. So some of your ideas might give us a better lead, and we'll come up with a document which may be of some help, which might act as a good policy input for the state, so that in 2036, whether we are there or not, at least the world will recognize that some initiative had been made. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I request the Director of Niger, Professor Sudhakar Panda, to have his remarks.
Good morning, everyone.
Just introduce Professor Jatin Naik.
Okay, maybe I should stand. Yes. Being a teacher, I always like to speak when I stand, not sit down. Down is I consider as relaxing. So good morning, everyone. And the dignitaries, President of the Economics, Odisha Economic Secretary, and the names I had heard but I had never met. And they come from Delhi, from Ahmedabad, Mumbai, and things. And most importantly, my colleagues here and students who are doing PhD. I will address them tomorrow's economist of this day, because this set of people already remark was there. We were not there in 1936 when Odisha was born, and there are very little chance that we will be there when Odisha will complete 100 years in 2036. So you are the future, And honestly, you should speak out what you would like to see Odisha in 2036. Not only from economics point of view, means you will feel proud to be a Odia person and things happening in Odisha. And of course, the steering wheel is the economics, which dictate terms what should happen. And of course, I was born in 1959, so I don't know anything about uh, beginning of Odisha. Of course, we study in history, newspaper, magazines that this is the way Odisha was born. But I thought I come from a village. I come from a remote village, and in 1984, I remember that I had to run quite a few times to the block office to get electricity to my house. That was the status of that. That's year I got married, so I thought that my wife should come, there should be electricity. Yeah, I managed after 6 months running around electricity, but of course, we had to hire a DG from a faraway city. And the situation was that you have to need a torch to see that the electric bulb is glowing or not. So what I wanted to say is that even if connections are there, the voltage or supply of voltage was very poor. I still feel bad that my sister could not study after class 7 because the high school was very far and the roads end have to go through a forest. I managed to study. And till now, I remember that at least last 3 4 months before the new harvesting starts, to my family to go sort of paddy rice. And I have missed many classes going to the landlord's house in the morning, sitting down on their veranda. Then they will give the rice, I will bring home, and then, you know, ସିଦ୍ଧ ଚାଉଳକୁ ଧାନକୁ ସିଝା ହେବ ତାପରେ ବୁତକୁତା କରିକି ଢିଙ୍କିରେ କୁଟିଲା ପରେ ଚାଉଳ ବାହାରିବ ତାପରେ ଖାଇବା. These are things the Odisha village perspective I have seen. I'm lucky that somehow I escaped from there and somehow I have reached here. And as I told, I still feel bad that my sister could not study and she died 2 months, 3 months ago by heart attack. I was not in Odisha for 26 years. After my schooling in my village, then I was in Bhadrak College for my ISc and BSc. Then I left for IIT Kharagpur to do my masters. And then I came back to Institute of Physics to do my PhD. This was from 82 to 88. I was there. And to have a cup of tea, we have to go to Vanivar, what they call Tanki. There were some shops or RRL Square. There was no light in that road. And that, in fact, only one bus will come from the bus stand, old bus stand which was in Bhubaneswar, now not there. We will go to Nandankana. It will go in the morning and come back in the evening. So from that time, after I came back 26 years as a director to Institute of Physics, now before that I was in Allahabad for 21 years and I was in the board of the Central University Koraput. But they had a transit campus in Bhubaneswar. So I reached by flight and they take me to a hotel called Sandy Tower. I had never known anything before that there was a hotel called Sandy Tower, but in the morning I came out and I could not recognize that where am I. So I had to walk a lot and then went to a chai dokan on the roadside to find out that can you tell me where is Acharya Bihar and how far it is to go there. And after a meeting I went to Acharya Bihar, then I know that which direction I am. And the only thing was available at that time is cycle rickshaw to go to anywhere else. There are no proper taxi system in that country. Now you have Ola and all this Uber and things like that. So I agree that we have come from one stage of Odisha which I had seen to to some stage of Odisha, whether you put it middle level or whatever level it has come. But my question is, should we be happy with that? In fact, I would say that our state was too late to come to this stage. In spite of all the resources the state had, it's not only manpower, mining, minerals, everything we had. We will give the ore and it will go somewhere, aluminum will be prepared, and then we buy with a higher rate. And many people, okay, I should say that my childhood, I didn't know what is an urban area. I saw a train when I was 15 years old. So I was thinking that urban area will be something a little better than my village and things like that. But I was very happy in my rural area. Okay, there was not much for education, not at all there anything for health. Education because has become business now in our country, so my village also have a college. But health it is not reached there, including drinking water. We have things here, somehow statistics or GDP we say, we feel happy that we have come because of the statistics. But what I feel bad, the village had everything of its own. Rice, vegetable, in my family only used to buy coconut oil for my mother and aunties to put in their head. And clothes we have to buy. That too, in the village there are weavers, those clothes. Salt we used to buy. If a guest arrives at home, myself and my uncle, we will go to our village, catch the fish and come and give. But what I feel bad is that agriculture has totally vanished from the village. Lands are lying barren. Even if you try to do something because of the government rate, minimum wage, it is not possible to pay that minimum wage to people who will be willing to come for 6 hours, 8 hours. It's better to buy rice instead of growing that. But this situation is very bad. We are losing what we had. We might be improving in one way, but we are losing our things. See, everyone will not be lucky to get a big job, take care of his brothers and sisters, which I could take, it is not. But let's ask the question. Even a daughter's marriage, till now in my village, the person has to sell some of his land to have the marriage because there is no income source, any other income source. That part we should not forget. Anything vision we have, the vision should not be only people you mentioned who belong to urban area. Many of them may not have seen a rural area. We have to include the rural area and our economic vision, the document we are preparing. We should include them, their need, what we can do for them. It has to be uniformly distributed. And the other point, maybe we are doing better economically. Yes, I can understand. Things I am being involved now. Odisha government is giving projects with money to college lecturers to do research. But what is the output at the end point? We have PhD degrees. For doing PhD, Odisha government is giving some money. And in fact, I asked some land, etc., for the hospital, Tata Memorial Hospital, I am bringing up in my campus. Very cooperative, and within 2-3 days, everything was done, and I got more than 40 acres of land. And I wanted to have a cyclotron machine which would prepare the nuclear medicine for the cancer patient. And Odisha government immediately agreed that they will give 150 crores. My budget is 300 crores. So from this, I can guess Odisha government is not the same Odisha government which was 20 years, 15 years ago. They have income source. I hope they are not bringing money from World Bank and giving to us. That's basically cheating us. We are being burdened that the loan will be on our heads. Governments will come and governments will go. But it's the Odia people, if they taken loan from some other source, at the end it will come on our heads. These are few things I see about it, and I'm not an economist, but I just told whatever my personal thing. But I think that the most important thing, bring people from other sectors, rural sector, even people. There is a fishing. Fishing is big, one of the big thing in Odisha. Include people them that whatever they are lacking and what we should do, they should be part of this. Remember that the people who supply to us, they should decide what should the vision, not the people who spend. You have enough money in your bank, you can order your food. Why do you need an economic vision? Who needs the economic vision? The economic vision of the states is required for the people who are basically underprivileged, so that they can come up. You will be happy to sharing time with them. I know many people don't even talk to village people, because they think they are babus, they are big. Who made you babus? Who made you big things? It is those village sector economy which supply to the urban area for an urban area to become urban area. What is there in Bhubaneswar to be so much proud of? Why the price of the land is so high? Why are that now I see that there are many empty houses, just built houses, no one is buying there, no one is selling there. Why? Because someone had money and bank was giving loan. Right? Whether the requirement is that much there or not, first we should address ourselves. Who made us what we are? And the economic vision should be to help those people who made us. Thank you. This is my all vision.
Thank you so much, sir, for your inspiring words. And in fact, I would like to thank you especially for providing all the funds for holding this meeting. In fact, that is the most
Funds are
important.
not mine. It's a national property. Something is happening. Once it happens in Odisha, hopefully other states will follow if they are not already doing. I don't know that we are following others or we are creating an example that others will follow us. Fund is not mine. Fund is all everyone of us. Anything I am convinced that this is something good, I should help this happen, I did.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. And let me also introduce Professor Amarendra Jyotishi. He is from Ajim Prem University. And Professor Bhavani Shankar Naik. He has come from all the way from London. Thankfully, fortunately, he was in Odisha in his vacation, and this event was happening. But otherwise, you could not have sponsored his trip.
No, I cannot pay anyone international trip.
Yes. So thank you for coming. So with this, we may conclude this inaugural session, and then after that we will
People will start the recording
start,
program.
start to
Okay, so enjoy. Have a look around my campus. I'm sure you will like it. And then I wish all the best for the upcoming programs. And I'm there always to help you. Anytime any help is needed, just give me a call or ask you to talk to me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's it.
Like point and the place one. I have several. सारा बहुत खबर बहुत बोल sit just sit there.
ତୀର୍ଥଙ୍କର ରାୟ ଜାଣିଥିବ
LSE.
He was my senior actually. CBS ରେ ପଢ଼ିଥିଲେ ସେଣ୍ଟର ଫର୍ ଡେଭଲପମେଣ୍ଟ ଷ୍ଟଡିଜ୍ ଇନ୍ ଟ୍ରିଭାଣ୍ଡ୍ରମ୍। ତ ସେଇଠି ଥିଲେ ତାପରେ ସେ ବହୁତ କଥା ଭେଟି ଅଛନ୍ତି।
He writes well. Ideologically, he moved towards a
I
little
know.
bit towards.
Across the right track. Not
Not
little
you're
bit.
right. Not purely right, but in a global scale.
Yeah.
ଆମେ ଗୋଟେ ବନ୍ଦ କରି ଆସିଲା ଦେବା କି ଗରମ ଲାଗିଲାନି ଟିକେ ଲାଗିଲାନି କ୍ଲୋଜ ଦ ୱିଣ୍ଡୋଜ
ଆପଣ
ମୋର କେନ୍ଦ୍ରାପଡ଼ା
ଇନିସିଆଲ ରାଉଣ୍ଡରେ ରିକ୍ୱେଷ୍ଟ କରିବା ପାଇଁ ଚାହେଁ କାରଣ ଆପଣଙ୍କର ମୁଁ ଆର୍ଟିକଲ ଦେଖିଥିଲି ଏଥିରେ ଯେଉଁ କାଉଣ୍ଟର ଭ୍ୟୁ ଅହମ୍ମଦାବାଦରେ ପଡ଼ିଛି
ହଁ ୟେସ୍
ସେଇଠି ସେ ରାଜୀବ ଶାହ ସେ ବାହାର କରିଥିଲେ ସେଟା ସେଇଥିରେ ୟୁ
ଗୋଟେ ଜାଗାକୁ ସେ ସବୁ ସର୍କୁଲେଟ୍ କରିଦେଇଛି ଯେହେତୁ ଫ୍ରି
ଆଚ୍ଛା ଆଚ୍ଛା ଓ ଆଚ୍ଛା ଆଚ୍ଛା
ସାଉଣ୍ଡ ବି କରେଣ୍ଟ ଛାପୁଛନ୍ତି ଅନ୍ୟାନ୍ୟ ଜାଗା ଛାପୁଛନ୍ତି
ସେଠି କହିବି ঠিক আছে আমরা এটা ম্যানেজ করতে পারি কোঅর্ডিনেট করতে
କାଲି ଆପଣ ଆସିଲେ କାଲି କି ଭଲ ହେଲା ହଁ ମୁଁ କହୁଥିଲି ନାଇଁ କିନ୍ତୁ ସେମାନେ ଭଲ କହିଲେ କାଲି ସମସ୍ତେ ପ୍ରୋ ଏଷ୍ଟାବ୍ଲିଶମେଣ୍ଟ ନୁହଁ ସେମାନେ Okay. Start. Okay, so we shall now start the technical session. So in this session, we have 4 chapters. The chapter on the making of modern history, a historical perspective by Professor Jatin Naik and Animesh Mahapatra. Animesh Mahapatra is not able to join with us, but Sir is there. And then we have Roots of Economic Retrogression in Colonial Odisha by Professor Keshav Das. Then Political Economy of Development in Odisha by Bhavani Shankar Naik. And then the other chapter, that is Evolving Social Context of Odisha. Dr. Subhashish Sahu is not able to join today. He will be joining tomorrow. In fact, his flight got cancelled twice. So finally he is coming today. So in the afternoon he will be reaching. So tomorrow he will be presenting the chapter. So I think we have 3 speakers in the session and we can start. So we'll start with Professor Jatin Naik. Sir, you can come this side and start.
Once you decide, you will also see. Once you decide, that laptop is connected with projector.
Is that?
This laptop is connected with projector.
I think Sir is not going to use any PPT.
No,
Sir,
no.
please.
I'm powerless and pointless. Uh, Thank you very much, Dr. Das. I feel out of place, somewhat out of place, because I'm not an economist, I'm not a historian. So someone could ask, why then are you here? I think because I was compelled to. But I think even a student of literature can provide a perspective on history, because history in the ultimate analysis is a narrative. So histories are narratives about the past, and people lay claim to that past, and their ways of laying claim to that past can differ. So across time and across space. So I thought I myself and my co-author, Dr. Animesh Mahapatra, we thought that we'll try to provide some kind of a narrative of the emergence of what we call modern Odisha. Unfortunately, we don't have a comprehensive history of Odisha. Sambad, the newspaper, tried to prepare a comprehensive history of Odisha, but that experiment wasn't entirely successful. People contributed different chapters, then they were so discordant that they asked Professor Pritish Acharya to rewrite the whole thing. So we have something like a comprehensive history of Odisha, but generally speaking, we don't have a very good comprehensive history of Odisha. So we are all trying to put pieces together. So in this chapter, we have titled this chapter, The Making of Modern Odisha, a Historical Perspective. So we have taken 1803 as the starting point. That's the point at which we think some kind of a beginning can be traced. Although, strictly speaking, that's not an absolutely correct starting point, because if we think that the starting point is provided by British occupation of Odisha in 1803, Ganjam had already been annexed by Odisha before that. But 1803 has been generally accepted as the moment when some kind of modernity began through our exposure to the West and through the introduction of certain policies which brought about transformative change in Odisha. Before that, we had, of course, Maratha rule, we had Afghan rule, Mughal rule, but transformative change of a kind which has shaped the world, our world today, can be seen to begin in 1803. So we have taken that as a starting point. British annexation of Odisha, or at least 3 coastal districts, and then later Sambalpur. And from this we take 1866 as another moment of rupture, the moment at which another turning point can be discerned. And then the other turning point we can think of as we can locate it in 1920, when the linguistic movement, the movement which was aimed at unifying Odia-speaking tracts into one administrative unit, then this movement, which had gathered tremendous momentum by 1920s, had to be merged with a pan-Indian movement, that is the Congress, the pan-Indian movement led by Mahatma Gandhi to liberate India from British rule. So this took a pan-Indian turn in 1920s, and 1936 we have Odisha, the modern Odisha, or unified Odisha as a separate province. Up to 1950, Odisha is a province. It's not a state. Odisha was a state, became a state only after the constitution came into being. So up to that point, Odisha is a province. As we know, province is actually a Latin word, a conquered territory. So in a colony, you can't have a state. So only in a federal republic, you can have a state. So Odisha is a separate province, and the chief minister then was called the prime minister. So Dr. Mahata was called the prime minister of Odisha. Vishwanath was called the prime minister of Odisha in 1937. So that's another moment, key moment in the history of modern Odisha being shaped. But I think from 1936 onwards, the narrative takes a different turn. Because up to this point, I'll not be very coherent, so I will digress now and then. The other nodal point is 1948, the merger of states. Because up to this point, it was a language-based movement. The aim was to form a state or form a separate province on the basis of language, Odia. So the attempt was to unify all the Odia-speaking tracts lying scattered in three presidencies: Bengal Presidency, Madras Presidency, and then central provinces, which had its headquarters in Nagpur, I think. So Odia-speaking tracts lay scattered in these three different presidencies, and these had to be united, and that was the focus of the language movement, or language agitation, how to save Odia language. But I think when 1948, something very significant happened, the significance of which has not been internalized adequately. That is the merger of states. Suddenly the narrative takes another turn, because Odia couldn't be the only unifying force, because now you had 62 tribal with the merger of 26 feudatory states. Not many of us knew, I think even I didn't know that the merger process of feudatory states in India began in Odisha with the merger of Nilagiri. Something that, because Patel and his advisors thought that, well, the feudatory states of India could be formed into a separate agency, and they should be gradually integrated into India, the modern Republic of India. But when we merged Nilagiri in 1940, immediately after independence, I think the idea of merging all these feudatory states in the newly formed provinces took root. That's why Patel came to Odisha in 1948, and all the feudatory states, 20 except Mayurbhanj, were merged with Odisha, and then the process, the initiative gathered momentum, and the rest is history. So I think this is where the history of modern Odisha takes a decisive turn for something that we haven't really looked at very carefully. We are still stuck in the linguistic movement, that the state came into being because Odia-speaking people wanted to form a single administrative unit under British rule and then form a separate province. But with the merger of 26 feudatory states in which the language wasn't Odia, many tribal communities formed these feudatory states. They were a very important part of these feudatory states. So from that point on, the narrative takes a different turn. And there is also another narrative which begins to exercise its influence, that is the narrative of development. Because even when we were talking about forming a state on the basis of language, and we are creating institutions, in 1903, or even before that, I think immediately after 1866, which exposed the vulnerability of Odisha as Odias as a community, Odisha as a province or division. At that time, it wasn't called a province, it was called an Odisha division. 1866 exposed our utter vulnerability, that British policies, British land revenue policies, British legal systems which they introduced, they all rendered us extremely vulnerable. That's why one of the earliest rebellions against British rule took place in Odisha, 1804, then Paika Rebellion, 1817, which are ruthlessly crushed. And after that, I think we made some kind of peace with British rule, and a nascent middle class began emerging. But the tribals continued to resist. We always, whenever we talk about the history of Odisha, we generally tend to erase traces of tribal rebellion. They continued to oppose. Whereas the middle classes, the peasants, they began to make peace with British rule, and all these changed land revenue policies, new legal systems, all these actually changed the face of modern Odisha, or created a kind of modernity which was very, very oppressive. And all this led to 1866 famine. And one of the reasons why 1866 famine took place was the obsession of British colonial administrators or policymakers with utilitarianism as an economic and social doctrine. So it was a kind of dogmatism of the colonizer and the fatalism of the Odias, which combined to create that kind of terrible situation in which, 1/3 of the population perished. So 1866 is another important turning point. I don't take 1817 could be a turning point, because after that, as I told you, all the possibilities of resistance were eliminated by ruthless British oppression. But 1866 thoroughly exposed our vulnerability, that as a province, as a division, as a people, we had become extremely vulnerable. Otherwise, 1/3 of the population would have perished. So that was one of the most terrible famines in colonial history. What did it signify? What did it lead to? One thing it led to was the vigorous engagement with print culture. The nascent middle class. Only very few people had received any education worth speaking about, worth speaking of, because there are a couple of high schools, so very few high schools in Odisha, very few schools, no college. So everyone who was ambitious had to go to Kolkata, and in those days it took 22 days to reach Kolkata from Cuttack, or even from Baleswar it took around 15 days. So now no railway communication. So 1866 is a turning point in the sense that it made the middle classes aware of the need to articulate their voice, their views, to make the colonial authorities hear their voices, and they also wanted to circulate information. Because, as I told you, print culture was almost non-existent in Odisha. The missionaries only, the first press was set up in Cuttack in 1837, and that was run by the missionaries, and they printed only a few textbooks, of mostly translations of the Bible. So print culture didn't strike very deep roots until 1866. Until 1865, Cuttack Printing Company was established, and in 1866, a momentous event took place. That was the publication of Utkal Deepika. So print culture, then the creation of a public sphere, because this printing company didn't confine itself only to publishing books or publishing a newspaper. They also created a public sphere in which debates would take place. In fact, a commissioner of Cuttack tried to find out how many clubs are there in Bhubaneswar, in Cuttack, what these people are doing. So they were trying to maintain some kind of a surveillance that the nascent middle class is becoming increasingly conscious of its role, as its agentive role in a new world. So print culture is one thing. The other thing is creation of the public sphere. So when Madhusudan Das comes back in the 1880s, up to this point, it was Utkal Deepika, Sambalpur Hitaishini, Baleswar Sambad Bahika. So these were the newspapers that came out in different parts of Odisha. But in 1880s, all this gathered tremendous momentum when Madhusudan Das came back from Kolkata, and set up practice as a lawyer in Bhubaneswar and tried to give leadership to this this nascent, emergent middle class. So the other thing that was happening was creation of institutions. Suddenly we had modern institutions outside family, outside villages, outside Bhagavata Tungis, new modern institutions like debating clubs. Katak Printing Company every week would organize a debate where other people from Kolkata, people from other parts of Odisha, Madhusudan Das himself, the young students of teachers of Ravenshaw College, which came into being in 1868. So they were debating issues. So public sphere was created. The other thing was the creation of institutions. Suddenly we started creating modern institutions outside the fields of religion, family, ethnicity, caste. So we had Utkal Sammilan in 1902. Actually, it officially originated in 1903, but 1902 in Rambha, its beginnings were made. So 1903, we had a major organization called Utkal Sammilani, where kings, feudatory chiefs, educated Odias, writers, ordinary people, they gathered to demand the formation of a separate province. And as I told you, language was a major plank of this movement, but it wasn't the only plank. They began also talking about development. So the other parallel narrative is the narrative of development. Many people think that, well, we are only obsessed with language and how Odia speaking people can form a separate space, we can escape the oppression of Bengalis. No, they were also a narrative of development is also beginning to unfold. I'll give you a small example. That is, I think in the Utkal Sammilan, they are constantly talking about industry, about cottage industries, cooperatives, and Madhusudan. If you go through the lectures of Madhusudan Das, is not so much talking about language, but about development. Constantly talking about the need to provide people employment. Every Odia should wear clothes hand spun by people. So that kind of thing. Then also they went a little further. The kings, because in those days the most powerful rich people were the kings, the feudatory chiefs. So they were encouraged to send people abroad to learn technology. So many of us must have heard of Sarangadhar Das. So the king of Dhenkanal sent him in 1905 to Japan to learn sugar technology. But since he found learning Japanese quite difficult and he thought that the Japanese society was rather closed and stagnant, he went to America as a stowaway in a ship and spent 12 years or 15 years in University of California and that place and became a sugar technologist and came back to Dhenkanal to build a sugar factory. 10,000 acres were given to him by the king, and then the king fell out with him, destroyed his machinery. He became a socialist, an MP, and a very famous socialist leader. But that's another story. So the point I was trying to make is that Utkal Sammilani was also interested in the economic transformation of the state, because the fact that confronted them most brutally was the poverty, the desperate poverty of the people, lack of development, lack of means of subsistence. The villages were backward, no communication. Think of the railways not existing in Odisha until I think 1897. I may get the date wrong. Recently, I think Ganeshwar Naik has brought out a wonderful book, Railway in South Asia. He has edited this, and Routledge has published it recently. So Odisha wasn't connected by the railways. It's a state it's a province, terrain that is crisscrossed by rivers. Very difficult terrain. That's one of the reasons why the British were perhaps not interested in annexing it. And then when they had to connect Madras with Kolkata, they had to. So that's another reason. So lack of development, the absence of development and the destitution of ordinary people, peasants. So Madhusudan Das is also talking about Prajasattva and all these things. So the development narrative shouldn't be lost sight of. Then I told you Utkal Sahitya Samaj, Utkal Sammilani, then Jagannath Vallabh Press in Devgarh, because Sambalpur Hiteshani was being published there. So all these institutions are coming up. In Sambalpur, some institutions came up. 5 of them actually went all the way to Simla to meet the Viceroy, to abolish Hindi in law courts and all that. So everywhere people were building institutions outside the fold of caste and religion and ethnicity. So then the other turning point was the 1920s, because that's when the non-cooperation movement launched by Gandhi was gathering momentum. And this movement based on language had reached some kind of a saturation point, because you cannot keep yourself cut off from a larger pan-Indian movement. So there was this difference of opinion between Madhusudan Das, who was an Odia nationalist, who wanted a province, Odia-speaking province to be formed, and then Gopabandhu Das, who thought that, well, we cannot remain isolated from the pan-Indian movement, which is anti-colonial. So Odia language movement was largely pro-colonial. They went against the British. Our enemies were the Telugus, were the Hindi-speaking people, and the Bengalis. We were not against the British. In fact, Madhusudan was constantly harped on the fact that you will get justice from the British, not from these people. But Gopabandhu Das represents this turning point, dramatic turning point, in which we suddenly merged ourselves with a larger pan-Indian movement. So suddenly there is also, you can say, consciousness taking a new shape. It's no longer the narrow Odia nationalist consciousness, which is obsessed with the development of Odisha, development of Odia language, unifying Odia speaking tracts, and criticizing your neighbors. Suddenly, we found ourselves drawn into a much larger movement. And this language movement also reached a culmination point in 1936, when the province was formed. And this continued up to 1947. And obviously, the anti-colonial movement brought about a new kind of spirit of, as I told you, pan-Indian spirit. It also had a development agenda. It's not as if they're only opposing the British, because Gandhi had this constructive program, and that's why all the freedom, whatever the Odia freedom fighters that were inspired by Gandhi, they're also involved in the construction activities, Rachanatmak activities that Gandhi talked about. So cattle rearing and Bori, for instance, where they had an ashram, became famous for a Binzharpur breed of cattle, because they were experimenting with and textiles, khadi, and all these things. So they also had a development narrative. It's not as if it is only anti-colonial. They are looking, and if you go through the speeches of Madhusudan Das in the Bihar Odisha Legislative Council, is constantly talking about development, how people's economic condition can improve, he said, you cannot talk about sanitation without sanity. So how can you have sanitation without sanity? He said, you are wasting so much money on Taj Mahal for a dead person, which is erected in the memory of a dead person, but you are ignoring lakhs of people who are dying. And then he calculates how much money is lost if a person dies of starvation. So if 2 lakh people die of starvation, what's the cost? So as I told you, there was this economic nationalism, which was also running parallel to the linguistic nationalism, to other kinds of nationalism. So 1920s, then 1936, Odisha becomes a separate province. 1947, we have independence. But then I told you, as I told you, the major turning point comes when the merger of states complicate this narrative. It's no longer Odia-speaking Odias desperately looking for their place in the larger scheme of things. Now 62 tribal communities have to be. And most of the feudatory states, again, were economically less developed than, I think, the coastal districts, 3 coastal districts, and Sambalpur, which was again part of the new Odisha. So suddenly you had to deal with uneven development of Deepak, I think, is writing something on that Katak, Puri, Balasore, even Berhampur, they are more developed than these feudatory states. There are many feudatory states which didn't have a school. And there is this famous instance of Raja of Kanika, who donated a vast sum of money to build the Kanika library in Ravansa, but he closed down the school in his own estate because he thought that seditious people are being trained in high schools. So you had this paradox that in feudatory states, they would donate a lot of money to Ravansa College, but in their home state, there won't be a primary school or a high school will be closed down. So now you had to, as I told you, deal with a complicated narrative where you have to, the tribals don't speak Odia, their languages have to be recognized, they live at a far lower economic level. And then suddenly we discover that this is also the mineral rich part of. In Odisha, this is this narrative that we are a resource rich state, but we are so poor. This narrative can be pernicious. Because if you take the myth, and unfortunately, the tribals also live in areas which are mineral rich. So it's always mineral exploitation at the expense of the tribals. So that narrative also, and Hirakud Dam, 1948, not many of us knew that actually the idea of Hirakud Dam was actually suggested first by Visvesvaraya, whom Gandhi had sent to survey the flood-prone areas in Odisha. But I think the most eloquent plea for building a dam there was in 1946. Maybe I get the date wrong by a few months or so. Ambedkar. Ambedkar came to Odisha as the member of the Viceroy's Council, and he delivered a speech in which he said that Odias are wasting a lot of water, which is flowing into the sea. And we are not making use of this vast quantity of water, which could be used for many productive purposes. So this is another narrative which is now beginning to unfold, the narrative of development, which confronts uneven development, which confronts the losers in the development process. So I think we'll stop there. I think when the merger of states makes us confront the fact of uneven development. Not that in coastal districts there wasn't poverty or that there weren't people who were everyone enjoyed the same kind of economic opportunity. No, but generally speaking, they were far less developed than people living in the coastal districts and in Sambalpur. And then Hirakud Dam, the building of Hirakud Dam also dramatically exposed certain fault lines in our narratives. So we would stop there, I think, begin from 1803 and stop at the point where the narrative of the emergence of modern Odisha gets complicated by the inclusion of the feudatory states and also beginning of development programs on a big scale, on a massive scale. And suddenly the older narrative, that's why this is a major problem now. Whenever people talk about why people are not speaking Odia, why the chief minister is not speaking, but nobody is bothered. But that narrative has lost its momentum. Nobody is bothered because many tribals don't speak Odia. So why should we bother? I mean, so many people don't understand that after 1936, even in 1920s, that narrative had got complicated because we are beginning to take a pan-Indian turn. And this narrative will lose its momentum. And other narratives of development, other narratives of taking a place in a pan-Indian world and taking all these tribal languages into account, giving them the whatever they deserve, and not to make sure that they don't become victims of development. We are only talking about development, but there are losers and there are winners. And suddenly this complicates a narrative that is predominantly language based. So this is how we will look at I hope this makes sense, but this is a presentation by an amateur. I hope it's not terribly disappointing. If it's disappointing, doesn't matter. It's terribly disappointing, then I'm a little worried.
Thank you so much, sir. I think it's always a great pleasure to listen to. And some of your YouTube talks also I have heard that Odisha Language and Culture Department is doing. So I think the floor is open for discussion. But I was just thinking, just before I leave it to others for asking questions, I was thinking about the writing part. See, Odia people also wrote quite a lot on palm leaves. And so that way, up to that point, we are not lagging behind either. But probably the transition could not happen from palm leaf to papers and printing factory. I remember my grandmother throwing away, one like almost got a bojhe talapatra in the village pond. And I now realize that I loss of so much of knowledge because my great grandfather was a great Vaidya, and he was the royal Vaidya. That's what I was told. And so that means we probably lost a lot of Ayurvedic knowledge.
Yes.
So, and that was there probably everywhere. And so how do you see this
Okay,
the transition?
I think we have dealt with this issue, I think, in a book which Onimes and I edited, and it was brought out by Routledge in 2022. In our introduction, we have discussed precisely this problem, and it's a fascinating issue. Of course, we had scribal production. We had a strong traditional orality, where people memorize things, and then also very strong tradition of scribal production, writing on palm leaves. Okay. This was replaced in around 1860s by a vigorous print culture. Not exactly replaced, but it was rendered less important. The problem with palm leaf, the culture, manuscript culture, which is based on writing on palm leaves, is that palm leaves are brittle. Palm leaves are perishable after actually in every village, like your grandfather did, after every 50 years, you discard all the palm leaves. The other thing is, palm leaves have this aroma of sanctity. We may say that palm leaves, people wrote a lot of manuscripts on palm leaves and all that, but it wasn't a democratic process. Only some castes were allowed to write. Mostly in Bhagavat, Tungis, they had palm leaf. And it was exclusive. And it is extremely expensive. So one article which we have included in our volume is by Sachidanand Mishra. He talks about how much money was involved, what kind of expenses were involved in producing one palm leaf manuscript. It's extremely expensive. Time-taking, expensive, and they couldn't be stored for a very long time. The lifespan is only 50 years or maybe 100 years. And there was no circulation. They had an aroma of sanctity. You can't touch, an untouchable can't touch. They were not literate. They won't be able to write. They can't keep palm leaf manuscripts in the houses. So there is an aroma of sanctity about them. In fact, there is a joke in Nilakantha Dasa's autobiography. For a very long time, ODIs didn't take to printed material. One fear was they will lose caste because they never know who printed it. Christians printed it, so they won't touch it. So many schools were closed because students were given printed textbooks. Okay, that's one. Fakir Mohan has also mentioned that in his autobiography. The second thing is, his friend said that you write something, you weigh a piece of palm leaf, and then you write something on it and weigh it again. You'll see that the palm leaf has grown heavier because Saraswati sits on it. So this kind of palm leaf had this mindset associated with it. So it cannot democratize knowledge. The other thing is, it was part of the market. Only kings, only jamindars, only rich people. If you read, there is something called colophon or puspika. In every palm leaf manuscript, at the end of the text, somebody would say, X gave me so much money to do this. And if you steal it, and I actually, they say that, well, I became humpbacked. I developed neck spondylitis because I wrote this over a period of 5 months. So you rear it like your own child. Every colophon or puspika says this. And if you steal it, may leprosy strike you, because they're extremely precious. Only monasteries, temples, and Bhagavata gadis in villages had it, and some people like your grandfather, but they must belong to higher castes. So palm leaves had this problem. They were not marketable, and they were perishable, and they didn't democratize knowledge. They monopolized knowledge. Okay? One thing.
I was just thinking, why you could not go for the transition?
The transition came, as I told you, as long as the missionaries were there, they were not interested in democratizing knowledge. They were interested only in proselytizing. They were interested in spreading knowledge relating to the Bible. Okay? 1865, when Kotak Printing Company was set up, it's the educated ODIs, Western educated ODIs who set up this. So they started democratizing knowledge. The first thing Utkal Deepika did, apart from publishing a newspaper, weekly newspaper, was to prepare annotated editions of Upendra Bhanja. And the advertisements came. Advertisements are published in Utkal Deepika saying a palm leaf manuscript of Mahabharata would cost you 50 rupees. Its printed version will cost you 1 rupee 50 paise. So the economics of it, this should be understood. The second thing is, suddenly, palm leaf manuscripts are always meant for a person whom the writer knew. But here, it entered an impersonal marketplace. So Balu Bazar came into existence. 100 or 200 publishing houses, they are actually booksellers. We didn't have publishers. We had booksellers and printers. So book became a commodity. Palm leaf manuscripts were not a commodity in the sense printed books were commodity. They couldn't be mass produced and they sold for a very high price. 50 rupees. Think of 50 rupees in 1860. As economist, you would tell me how much does it cost now? When they could buy a book for 4 annas, the same book, or 10. There are a number of advertisements which actually give you the cost of. So democratization of knowledge and books reaching the marketplace, entering the marketplace. Palm leaf manuscript didn't create that kind of market. It was very exclusive, very expensive, and also had this problem of religion that only certain castes can. So I think that's from Pothi to print. That's what we said. So anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. One relates to the figure of 1/3 of Odisha perished in the famine.
1/3 of Odisha division,
Right.
not the feudatory states.
So recently, Professor Vidyut Mahanti has written a book on this, and in that context, there was this discussion where Tim Dyson, who is a famous demographer, and he has written a population history of India, in fact, questioned the figure.
Oh.
So how? I mean, if I don't know if there. I mean, till date I thought that
Okay.
that's the figure. That
Okay, suppose it wasn't 1/3, it was 1/4. Still, it was a terrible tragedy. Even if it's 1/5. Maybe those days you didn't have people who are collecting statistics or figures and all that, but the graphic images are still there. I think and don't bother about 1866 famine, 1943 when you had highly developed technologies for collecting statistics and all that. 30 million people died, and people said more people actually died. Their numbers were not taken into account. Like Baleswar, they call it Bengal famine. 1943 in Baleswar also people died, but they are not included. So either it's exaggerated or it's underestimated, but still a terrible tragedy. A few thousands. Suppose it's not 1/3, it's 1/4 or 1/5. Still, it's out of 30. The population was 3 million. So even if 500,000 people die, if 10 people die in Europe, they make such a hullabaloo, and it's 1/4 of the. Okay, let's say 1/4 of the population perished. But there are vivid. They set up a commission in 1867. At the end of the famine, and the famine commission report is available in National Archives. It was placed in the British Parliament. So on the net you get all the debates and all that. They were extremely ashamed of their role as administrators. And in fact, rice was rotting in Puri. A ship was stranded, and all the rice was offloaded and brought to so hundreds of people or thousands of people were dying. And the rice, thousands of bags of rice were rotting in the seashore because their commitment to utilitarianism. The market will take care of everything. One shouldn't intervene. When I'm talking an amateur economist, I shouldn't do that, but that's exactly what they said. And all their reports, in all their letters, correspondence, they say that the market will take care of it. Don't interfere in the market. Many collectors British collectors wrote, please send us rice. And then communication was another problem. We can't imagine the kind of Odisha that I think the director was talking about. Think of 1860s. Rice arrived near Paradip, but they couldn't be brought over because the rainy season had come. So Odisha had been cut off from the rest of the world. In my childhood, only my village is only 15 kilometers from Bhubaneswar, and it used to take us in rainy season 1 hour to reach the roads. So yeah, so these are nitpicking. I think whether 10,000 people died or 2,000 people died, but lots of people died, and there was an international hue and cry. It's not as if people didn't lots of missionaries also came and looked at what was happening. So,
Yeah, Dr. Joe. Joe, you were asking.
It's so fascinating to listen to you. I had two additional points maybe to trigger. some
yeah,
more
please,
thoughts.
I think we'll enrich our.
Okay. So the 2 points basically also because I have worked on one of those. One was relating to that resources particularly. Quite often we look at this colonial on forest resources, on that railway track making, etc. That how that kind of forest use and deforestation and exclusion happened. But there are also a narrative on which we have also figured it out that iron smelting, which is quite a huge activity, and iron smelting was never sedentary. Where and coal technology had not come, so it was charcoal based. So where charcoal was there, where iron ore was there, it was happening. And in Odisha, there are many places, evidences comes from Talcher, from
Yes,
Koraput and others. So this resource-based dependency and narrative, and these irons are not necessarily made for domestic consumption purpose. They are more for state, for defense.
Yeah,
and
for
other
instance,
things.
making weapons, arrows,
Exactly.
or
And so many
spears.
almost 25 trees being there, and it was a kind of a war state also in some sense. That is one part of this. The other one is about this. Yesterday, Pacharan Kango was telling that okay, a lot of water is getting drained into the sea, so we should conserve it. But it was Arthur Cotton who basically this started with this anecdotes in
Yes.
Godavari, and then
Jobra.
here also it happened in Karnataka and other places. So. And with that, the debate started was that fishes are not able to go, and the problem is kind of a lot of fishes which are basically like hillside type of fishes, or they knew salmon. So those fishes, the path was blocked. So then that is where the debate started, and we are working on it actually. It's a Halley who kind of raised it, but there was another guy called Francis Day who then looked at the freshwater fishes of India and Burma. And he comes to Odisha, Cuttack, talks about the vermins actually. The crocodiles are vermins, and they have to be masked and all that. And the debate on conservancy versus the resource dependency. So those are some kind of narratives which are coming out from some of these companies or British documents actually, which is not necessarily the mainstream part of the thought process. So
Yes.
I'm not posing these as questions to you.
No, but it also triggers some
yeah.
mind. Yeah, thank you very much, because that's another direction which our narrative can take, the narrative of the introduction of technology. The first thing is, I think, the narrative constructed by the British officials is heavily biased in favor of their interests. So, for example, I think they present railways as a blessing. Okay, that with railways came modernity. That we were savage, we were traveling in bullock carts. But again, because we are not looking at indigenous sources, what our own people wrote, we don't get that perspective. I will quote not an ordinary person, but Dr. P.C. Rai, Prafulla Chandra Rai, autobiography, memoir of a Bengal chemist. One of the most highly educated and brilliant scientists that India could produce. PhD from Edinburgh, there are many compounds named after him. So he sent a petition in his autobiography, he has reproduced the petition to the British government. He says that, well, the railway embankments are raised, okay, and coastal areas are crisscrossed by rivers and lots of streams, rivers. So he says that these are led to waterlogging on a massive scale. So that has resulted in malaria as an epidemic. Then I came to an ODI autobiography, because malaria was never an epidemic. In no earlier narrative in Odisha we talk of cholera, maybe, but one never heard of malaria killing a whole village. In Pulin Bihari Rai, who was a nephew of Gauri Shankar Rai, who was the founder of Kotak Printing Company, and he has written an autobiography which is which presents Odisha, or at least Cuttack, between the two world wars. He said his village is in Asureswar, Kendrapada. He said that suddenly whole villages got wiped out, like in cholera. And all this because of railway embankments, because water couldn't naturally drain itself into the sea. So we haven't dealt with this narrative. We are still victims of the modernity narrative, that whatever they did, the railways was, again, Rabi Ahuja, opening of the country or something. Rabi Ahuja, Heidelberg. He has written a fantastic book on how transport system changed under colonial. He shows how in Britain, the railway system, the railway tracks, they all connect smaller places to bigger places. So the graph, he has given a graph, it's always like this, like this. In India, it's always a straight line. And the straight line is partly or mainly accounted for because it's the British interest of extraction of surplus. Calcutta to Madras, one straight line.
More like torch race.
They tried to connect the three major presidencies, Calcutta, Bombay, Madras. All these are sea coasts. They all belong to sea. So you have a triangle. In between, sometimes they will pilgrims, in order to facilitate pilgrimage to Puri, that is also extremely profitable, from Khordha road to a small line to short line to Puri. Nowhere small places are connected. Think of Talcher not being connected to Sambalpur for 70 years, at least 70, 60 years. And the economy of Odisha must have suffered. Because they never thought about it. For them, movement of the army and movement of goods. There are two things. So opening of the country. And they said that we are like Prometheus, we brought fire. These people were savages. Then he gives this simple example. Whoever has gone to Puri must have crossed a place called Atharnala. So that's a bridge. That was a pre-British bridge. So the bridge building technology existed. That bridge exists even today for 300 years. With some retrofitting, it could continue. So they said that nothing existed before we came. This is the story of all colonizers. Sometimes they even said that people didn't exist, like in Australia or there are no New Zealand. There no one that was there. We went and so they were animals. So they had their Burmans, so in India they couldn't say that, but their policy.
Yeah, but the language kind of more evidently tells that.
So communication is this. We had our routes, which were more eco-friendly. The winding. Suppose the river is shallow at one point, so the road will cross that river at that point. They don't build bridges. So why do we need so many bridges when most rivers in Odisha are not, for instance, perennial? So during summer, they have fair weather roads. Only for 1 month, they would have a flood and all that. So that is absolutely functional and absolutely congenial to our needs. But they created a narrative in which we believe that industry suits them. Communication network, which suits them. Medicine, which suits them. So
It was useful for revenue purpose also.
So I think after 1857, I may be wrong. After 1857, tribals in many parts of India were forbidden to smelt iron. But they thought that they're building arrows and they'll kill British officers. So I once saw a documentary in which I think in Bhils knew how to. In Odisha, they knew how to.
Before that, in fact,
Much
when they
before.
fought with Marathas, they
Yeah.
destroyed one of their protected forests because
Yes.
they knew that Marathas are using
And I think ecological history of India, Rama Guhad, Madhav Gadgil, they say that Napoleon was defeated because British ships were built out of timber from Indian teak. So they deforested India to build stronger ships which could destroy Napoleon's fleet. So all these colonial connections we should have to keep in mind, that it's not a narrow little narrative that we are constructing in Bhubaneswar. It has global ramifications and we must be aware of that. Like we were influenced by utilitarian economic doctrines or social doctrines when the famine is taking place here. All the correspondence is saturated with utilitarian economics. You read it, some collector, he is also writing utilitarian, that the market should. Calcutta, they reply, no, don't interfere with the market. The market is God. The invisible hand of Adam Smith is killing Odias everywhere. So
Joe, you would like to ask the question?
Just a quick question. So, how were well preserved are examples of early Odia print culture, especially the kind of narratives that.
In Odisha, nothing is well preserved, like Konark. So, to the extent that anything is preserved, some of these are preserved, but in British Library, not in Odisha. I was just talking to Dr. Mahanti that libraries are the most neglected institutions in Odisha. So, where would they be?
So what about the state archives, sir?
Oh, state archive in a very poor state. But they have, it's not as if. And I must again not sound very cynical, a tremendous job has been performed by Srujanika. They have digitized nearly 200,000 pages of early Odia printed books, magazines. So some have survived.
Utkal Deepika,
Everything. Whatever exists. Because many are lost. Much is lost. But whatever survives has been digitized, and he has received much recognition. But that's a momentous task he has performed, fulfilled. So that's there. Yes?
Actually, I am also doing my research work in regional development. Whenever we are studying uneven economic progress, regional disparity, historical perspective plays an important role because, as you said, that the starting point let us take from 1802. Because formally the British took over Odisha province and the coastal districts were included in Bengal presidency. But sir, before Britishers took over Odisha, during Mughal also Odisha province was divided into two parts: the Moghalband area and the hill area. So basically the coastal and the hill area. And before that also, if you look at the history, it is also divided by Maratha and other people. After in the post-colonial period also, Odisha land is also divided in east, west, south, north, and central zone. Again, NSS divided north, south, and central zone. So whenever we were looking at the historical perspective, and we got to know that the regional disparity at the present time is due to the different interventions of the British colony during that time. Like the coastal areas are developed because all the facilities and the human development indicators were developed to that area by the Britishers, and the feudatory states are neglected. So, which from starting from which point
Odisha, they were very democratic. They looted everyone. Okay? When the Mughals and Afghans ruled us, they had a system which wasn't extractive. I may be wrong. I keep asking Amarendra Babu, when did land become a commodity in Odisha? So I still don't have information. But the most important novel in Odia, Saman Athagund, 6 acres and a third, is not about love, is not about marriage, not about anything. It's about land becoming or turning into a commodity, sellable commodity, something that didn't happen before British rule. So if there was oppression, there was extraction, there was tyranny, they were democratic. They killed all of us, or they tyrannized over all of us, and all were equally poor. Some were rich. But during British rule, the novelty of the policies, you look at the land revenue policy and the legal system. What about the during Mughal rule or during Maratha rule? Or they didn't introduce anything that actually was absolutely alien. That's what was happening everywhere in India. The poor were poor, the rich were rich, and if their crops failed, they won't take 1/4 of it because there are no crops. But when the economy gets monetized, You have to pay that 1 rupee revenue, land revenue, then you borrow it, then you mortgage your land because it's now a commodity, something that you couldn't do earlier. The land belonged to the king or the zamindar, you couldn't sell it. The zamindar can throw you out, but you couldn't sell it. So I still want to find out from all these distinguished economists, when did land become a sellable commodity? I think during British rule. There are no sub-register offices in Maratha rule or Afghan rule.
This land revenue system is also like fragmented. Around 362 types of land revenue laws.
So what? But as I told you, if the crops failed, they will that year they will not ask you to take. But the economy hadn't been monetized. Okay. There are many things which are absolutely free, like salt. So one major reason why the 1817 rebellion took place was that salt was taxed by the British for the first time. So I think they didn't penetrate. The administrative systems, the legal systems didn't penetrate to even your rice bowl in a cottage. You could get some rice and take some salt and pluck some fruits and eat. But everything had to be. And during British rule, the feudatory chiefs also grew far more oppressive. Think of Konika, which king of Konika, which imposed 64 types of taxes on people. I don't think that happened. Marathas will come, loot your mangoes and go, or fish. Then leave you alone for about 2 years or 1 year. But every day you have to, your fruits don't belong to you, your fish don't belong to you. If you get widowed, then you have to pay a tax for your hearth. 64 types of taxes. And most of the time, I think, again, Deepak would bear me out, before the British came, most of the feudatory chiefs lived slightly better of life than that. They didn't have palaces. Suddenly, go to Mayurbhanj, Italian marble, Belgian glass, Chippendale furniture. Go to Daspalla, the entire roof is made of lead, which people have stolen after 1948. That's another. So think of what the colonization did to us. There was a kind of equilibrium that it destroyed.
This colonial narrative also contradicts the foreign narrative.
Whatever, but these are the facts. Let's be contradicted after 10 years. But let's build another narrative which is at least not infected by the earlier narrative. Okay.
Okay, I think we can have a tea break.
Yeah.
Tea is
I'll be very happy because I won't face any more questions.
No, because we had lot of discussion. So let us take tea and we can come back. So that's why it is brainstorming discussion, and we'll continue till late evening. And I understand that it is going a little bit outside the time. It's okay. We're having good discussion. Yeah? Time to sorry. Outside there is tea. So let us take the tea and come back. We can come back immediately.
So I survived.
No. It was wonderful, sir.
Sidwin